At some point without warning, something shifts inside you. Not with drama, not with crises. There is no clear event you can point to. Life is still moving, people are still talking, routines are still happening, yet internally, something essential has gone quiet. This is often the moment people unknowingly enter what has long been called the dark night of the soul. What once felt obvious no longer holds. Beliefs that guided you for years feel thin. Emotional reactions that used to come automatically now hesitate or don't appear at all. You don't feel intense pain. You feel something more unsettling than pain. A silent confusion. You wake up and move through your day, but the internal compass that once gave meaning to choices, relationships, and direction seems unreliable. Things that used to anchor you, roles, identities, goals, even spiritual ideas, no longer provide the same sense of certainty. Conversations feel strangely distant. Achievements feel oddly hollow. Even your emotional responses feel delayed, muted, or absent. It's not despair. It's not sadness in the usual sense. It's the feeling of walking through familiar territory with the lights turned off. This is why the experience is so disturbing. There is nothing dramatic to fight against. No clear enemy. No visible wound. Just a quiet sense that something fundamental has shut down. And because there is no obvious cause, the mind begins to search for explanations. You wonder if you've lost something vital. If you've made a mistake, if you've drifted too far from yourself. The silence feels unnatural, almost threatening, because you were taught that clarity should feel bright, emotional, motivating, alive. But in this moment, none of that is available. What you're left with is the unsettling awareness that the structures you relied on no longer work. You can't go back to feeling the way you used to, not because you don't want to, but because something deeper no longer responds. It feels as if an internal switch has been turned off, and you don't yet understand why. Something essential seems to have disappeared, and you don't know what replaced it. If this resonates with you, you're not broken. You're at the beginning of something most people never learn how to name. If this kind of content speaks to you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments if you've ever felt this quiet confusion yourself. You're not alone in it. When this silent shift begins, the first response is almost always fear. Not panic, but a slow, creeping anxiety that settles into the background of your thoughts. Because you don't understand what is happening, your mind starts trying to label it. And the labels that choose us are rarely kind. You tell yourself that you're lost, that you somehow took a wrong turn without noticing. You assume that whatever progress you thought you were making emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, must have been an illusion. If clarity once felt closer, this new emptiness feels like proof that you failed. Many people interpret this state as spiritual regression. They believe they were once connected, and now they are not. That they had insight, purpose, or direction, and somehow managed to lose it. Others see it as a personal flaw. Something broke inside them. Something fragile couldn't handle the pressure. Something essential collapsed. The absence of emotion or meaning is read as damage rather than transition. And because our culture only recognizes growth when it looks productive or inspiring, this quiet undoing feels like the opposite of progress. There is also a more subtle fear hiding underneath all of this. The fear of having no internal reference point anymore. When your old beliefs stop working and your emotions stop guiding you in familiar ways, it feels as if you've been cut loose from yourself. You may think, I don't recognize who I am anymore, or I've lost touch with my true self. The mind desperately wants to restore the previous state, because at least that version of you felt oriented, even if it was fragile. So the night is framed as a collapse. A mistake, a deviation from the path. Something that must be corrected as quickly as possible. The pressure to fix yourself becomes intense, because staying in this undefined space feels unbearable. Yet what makes this phase so frightening is not that something has gone wrong, but that the familiar structures that once gave you certainty are no longer available. And without them, the mind assumes danger. It calls this silence failure. It calls the pause regression. It calls the unknown a loss, even when it may be the very thing reshaping you at a deeper level. But there is a moment, often quiet and almost imperceptible, when a different question begins to surface. Not an unswear, just a possibility. A subtle pause in the self-judgment. What if this experience is not a malfunction of your soul, but a function of it? What if the very darkness you are trying to escape is not an interruption of your path, but a necessary stage within it? This single shift in perspective changes everything, because it removes the assumption that something has gone wrong, and then a deeper question follows. What if clarity cannot emerge while old illusions are still illuminated? As long as familiar beliefs, identities, and emotional certainties remain brightly lit, they continue to guide you even when they are no longer true. Darkness, in this sense, is not destruction. It is subtraction. It is the dimming of false light, so something more accurate can eventually be seen. When the night falls, it doesn't erase truth. It dissolves what once felt true, but no longer is. And without this dimming, clarity would never have space to form. The mind resists this idea because it wants immediate orientation, but the soul operates on a different rhythm. It knows that some forms of understanding cannot be added, they must be revealed by removing what blocks them. This question doesn't bring instant relief. It doesn't explain everything, but it opens a doorway. Instead of fighting the darkness as proof of failure, you begin to consider that it may be performing a precise and intelligent role. And once that possibility is allowed, the entire experience shifts from panic to inquiry. Not how do I escape this, but what is being taken away, and why. What you once called clarity was rarely pure perception. It was stability created by familiarity. It was the comfort of knowing who you were supposed to be, how you would expect it to feel, and which direction you were meant to follow. That sense of certainty was supported by identity, by roles you learned to inhabit, stories you told about yourself, and emotional patterns that had become predictable. As long as those structures remained intact, life felt oriented, even if that orientation was narrow. Much of this clarity came from expectations. You knew how you were meant to respond emotionally, what progress was supposed to look like, which desires were acceptable, and which paths felt safe. You were guided by inherited narratives about success, purpose, love, healing, even spirituality. They gave you a sense of direction, but they also limited what you could perceive. You weren't seeing reality directly. You were navigating through a map handed to you long before you questioned it. When the dark night arrives, these reference points collapse. Not because something is wrong, but because they can no longer contain who you are becoming. And without them, the mind assumes confusion. Yet what is disappearing is not true clarity. It is conditioned orientation. A system that told you where to go without asking whether it was still true. Real clarity cannot be built on borrowed meaning. It cannot rely on emotional scripts or inherited identities. It only emerges when those supports fall away. What feels like disorientation is often the first moment you are no longer being guided by external frameworks, but are being prepared to see without them. When we think of the deep, internal shifts that happen during the dark night of the soul, it can be helpful to turn to psychological theories that shed light on the process. Mary Ainsworth, a renowned psychologist, is particularly relevant here, as her work on attachment theory offers profound insight into what occurs when the emotional systems we rely on no longer provide stability. Ainsworth's research demonstrated that when attachment systems lose predictability, they no longer function in the way they're meant to. Instead of providing a sense of safety, they collapse, leaving the individual with a sense of uncertainty and emotional disorientation. In her studies, Ainsworth highlighted the importance of trust and predictability in maintaining healthy emotional attachments. When these elements are absent, the attachment system, which guides our responses to the world around us, enters a state of dysfunction. During this breakdown, the usual emotional responses that help us navigate relationships and life's challenges lose their clarity. We stop feeling anchored by the familiar, and we enter a state where emotions are muffled, reactions are delayed, and the usual signals that guide us through the world simply don't come. This is precisely what happens during the dark night of the soul. The lack of direction or clarity isn't a sign of failure or personal breakdown. It's a response that your system has developed to protect itself. Just as an attachment system can shut down when it no longer trusts, your inner emotional system shuts down when it no longer knows what to rely on. The absence of emotional guidance is not a sign that something has gone wrong, but a defense mechanism in response to the loss of the familiar structures that once provided direction. Ainsworth's research shows that when predictability and trust are lost, the emotional system can go quiet, much like how, in the midst of a crisis, we may feel emotionally numb or distant, unable to react with our usual intensity. This silence is the system's way of organizing itself in the absence of old patterns, recalibrating in preparation for a more grounded form of emotional clarity. What we experience as a dark night isn't a breakdown, but a process of internal reorganization. It's the emotional system's attempt to restructure itself so that it can eventually respond to life in a more genuine and sustainable way. The dark night of the soul, then, can be seen not as a personal failure or a mistake, but as an essential realignment of your inner systems. Just as a wounded attachment system must heal in order to restore trust, your emotional system is undergoing a transformation. When the familiar guides disappear, what remains is a quieter, more resilient system. And this process, though unsettling, is necessary for a deeper, more authentic form of clarity and connection to emerge. In the same way that Ainsworth's research on attachment reminds us that trust and predictability are key to emotional well-being, the dark night shows us that the silence and confusion we feel are not signs of a breakdown. Instead, they represent the space needed to rebuild, recalibrate, and emerge stronger, more attuned to the true nature of our inner selves. This process is uncomfortable, but it is also the precursor to a clarity that isn't built on external frameworks or old emotional scripts. It's built on a newfound trust in what is truly real and meaningful. The experience of the dark night of the soul is best understood as a kind of psychological in-between state. You are no longer the person you once were, but you have not yet become the person you are meant to be. This state is neither regression nor forward movement in the traditional sense. Instead, it's a transitional phase where the usual markers of identity, purpose, and direction have faded or disappear. It's a place of deep uncertainty, a gap between the known and the unknown, between external guidance and internal clarity. In this state, you may feel lost, disconnected, and adrift. What once anchored you, whether it was certain beliefs, roles, or life goals, no longer holds the same weight. The external framework that once gave structure to your life has dissolved, leaving you in an undefined space. It's like walking through a fog, where there are no clear signposts, no obvious directions, and no familiar reference points. The mind wants to make sense of this emptiness, but it can't, because there is no clear resolution or final destination. You are simply in between. This emptiness, though unsettling, is by design. It's an essential part of the process. It's not a mistake or a failure. Rather, it's the space needed for transformation to occur. It's a time when the internal systems that once operated on autopilot, emotional responses, beliefs, and external validation, fall away, allowing for a deeper clarity to form. This state is disorienting, yes, but it's also fertile ground for new insight. You are not lost. You are in the process of becoming something new, and this transition requires that the old forms of direction and structure dissolve temporarily. So, instead of seeing this disorientation as a problem, recognize it as an essential pause. It's the space between who you were and who you will be. Embrace this time of quiet confusion as an opportunity for reinvention, where the old is dismantled and the new has yet to fully emerge. In this gap, clarity will eventually begin to surface, but it can only do so when you stop trying to force it. Let the emptiness guide you forward. The dark night of the soul can only be understood through transition, not correction. It is like turning off artificial lights in order to see the stars. As long as the lights remain on, the sky looks empty. Nothing seems to be there. But when the light is removed, what was always present slowly becomes visible. The darkness does not create the stars, it reveals them. In the same way, the night you are moving through is not taking clarity away from you. It is removing the false illumination that once blocked your deeper perception. It is also like dismantling a house before rebuilding it. You cannot strengthen a structure that was designed for a different version of you. The walls that once protected you now limit your movement. To create something stable and aligned, the old framework must first come down. During demolition, everything looks like loss, debris, emptiness, uncertainty. Yet, without this phase, reconstruction is impossible. And finally, it is like removing crutches before learning to walk again. The support once necessary for survival eventually becomes an obstacle to growth. Taking them away feels dangerous at first. You feel weak, unstable, unsure of each step. But this vulnerability is what forces the body to relearn balance from within. The dark night works the same way. It removes external supports so internal strength can develop. These transitions feel threatening because they strip away familiarity, but they follow a precise logic. There is no clarity without prior darkness, no stability without disassembly, no authentic movement without first standing unsupported. What feels like collapse is often the exact condition required for vision to return clearer, quieter, and no longer dependent on borrowed light. One of the most common mistakes during the dark night of the soul is the urgent attempt to escape it. The moment the silence becomes uncomfortable, the mind rushes to restore light as quickly as possible. People try to illuminate the night with answers, labels, and explanations, believing that clarity must be forced back into existence. They consume spiritual content compulsively, jump from teaching to teaching, and search for someone else's words to tell them what this phase means and how long it will last. But this frantic search only creates more noise, not clarity. Another trap is the need to assign immediate meaning. There is a strong impulse to declare a new purpose, a mission, or an identity, simply to end the uncertainty. Yet meaning that is forced does not integrate, it only covers the emptiness temporarily. Others make the mistake of copying paths that seem to have worked for someone else, assuming that if another person found clarity through a certain method or belief, the same formula should apply to them. But the dark night is deeply personal. Relied cannot guide you through an internal passage. These attempts don't shorten the night. They extend. Italiano. Every effort to escape reinforces the idea that something is wrong, that the silence is dangerous, that the void must be filled. And as long as you are trying to replace what was removed, the deeper reorganization cannot complete itself. The night is not asking you to find answers, it is asking you to stop grasping for them. If this resonates with you, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your experience in the comments. This space exists for those who are learning to trust the process rather than fight it. The dark night of the soul is often misunderstood because people expect it to deliver answers. They wait for insights, revelations, or sudden understanding to appear in the emptiness. But this phase was never meant to explain anything. Its function is not to add information, meaning, or direction. Its function is subtraction. The dark night removes the constant inner noise that once dictated how you felt, what you pursued, and how you interpreted your life. It quiets the mental commentary, emotional reflexes, and inherited narratives that kept you oriented but not necessarily aligned. This is why the experience feels barren. When the noise disappears, there is nothing familiar left to hold on to. Yet what remains is not absence, it is space. And space is essential for clarity. True clarity cannot coexist with constant stimulation, internal chatter, or emotional urgency. As long as the mind is filled with explanations and interpretations, it cannot see what is actually there. Silence is not the enemy of understanding. It is its precondition. The dark night does not hand you clarity as a concept or a belief. It prepares the conditions for clarity to arise on its own. And when it does, it doesn't arrive as excitement or certainty. It arrives as simplicity, as something so obvious and grounded that it feels almost unnoticed. This is why it cannot be forced. Clarity that emerges from silence has a different quality. It is stably, quiet, and self-evident. The night does not speak. It clears a space so that, eventually, you can see without needing to be told. It is important to understand this before expectations quietly sabotage the process. The clarity that comes after the dark night of the soul does not arrive with fireworks. It is not dramatic, mystical, or emotionally overwhelming. There is no surge of excitement, no sense of being elevated above life, no constant feeling of inspiration. In fact, if you are waiting for something intense or extraordinary, you are likely to miss it entirely. The clarity that emerges is subtle. It is calm. It does not announce itself. It feels less like discovery and more like recognition. Nothing suddenly becomes perfect, and nothing feels permanently joyful. Instead, there is a quiet firmness, a grounded sense of knowing what no longer fits and what does. Decisions feel simpler, not because you feel more motivated, but because there is less internal conflict. You stop negotiating with yourself. This kind of clarity can seem disappointing at first, especially if you associate growth with emotional intensity. The mind expects transformation to feel powerful, ecstatic, or deeply emotional. But that kind of excitement belongs to the old pattern of seeking highs and meaning through stimulation. What follows a dark night is something steadier. It doesn't fluctuate with mood or circumstance. It doesn't depend on emotional reinforcement. This clarity is stable because it is no longer built on feeling. It is built on alignment. It doesn't need constant confirmation. It simply holds, and precisely because it is quiet and undramatic, it lasts. There was a time when someone I knew was constantly searching for meaning. Every phase of life had to lead somewhere. Every emotion needed an explanation. Every experience had to fit into a larger purpose. Books, teachings, philosophies, and plans filled his days. From the outside, he looked driven and intentional. From the inside, he was exhausted. Eventually, something inside him collapsed. The search lost its energy. The questions stopped producing answers. What once felt like motivation turned into emptiness, and with that emptiness came fear. Without direction, he felt as if his life had stalled. For a long time, He tried to restart the search. He pushed himself to care again, to feel inspired again, to chase clarity the way he always had. But nothing responded. Then, without deciding to, he stopped. Not as a strategy, but because there was no strength left to continue. He began living in a simpler way, doing what needed to be done without asking what it meant. And in that unremarkable stillness, something shifted. One afternoon, he noticed that he wasn't confused anymore. Not because he had found new answers, but because the urgency to ask had disappeared. What mattered became obvious without effort. What didn't matter quietly fell away. The clarity he had been chasing arrived only when the search ended. It didn't feel profound. It felt settled, and for the first time, that was enough. During the dark night of the soul, the most important thing to understand is that this is not a phase that responds to effort. Trying to manage it like a problem only adds tension. This is why the most helpful actions are also the simple. Do not force major decisions. If something does not clearly need to be decided, allow it to wait. Clarity that is real does not rush, and choices made under pressure often belong to fear, not insight. Avoid the urge to redefine your entire life while you are in this state. The mind wants resolution, so it tries to reorganize everything at once. Resist that impulse. What is falling apart is meant to fall apart on its own. Interfering too early only replaces old structures with new ones that serve the same purpose. Instead, keep your routines basic and grounded. Eat, sleep, move, work, and take care of simple responsibilities without asking them to provide meaning. Observe what is happening inside you, without trying to interpret it. Not every internal movement needs a label or explanation. Watch thoughts, emotions, and reactions come and go without building stories around them. And above all, do not demand clarity before it is ready to emerge. Pressure distorts perception. The more you insist on understanding, the more the process resists. Clarity arrives when there is space for it, not when it is chased. The most difficult truth about the dark night of the soul is also the one that brings the greatest resistance. The more you try to escape it, the longer it lasts. Every attempt to force your way out reinforces the belief that this state is wrong, dangerous, or unacceptable. And that belief keeps the nervous system on alert, preventing deeper process from completing itself. Struggle creates friction. Friction prolongs the night. Paradoxically, the moment you stop trying to leave, the night begins to do its work. Remaining does not mean collapsing into passivity or despair. It means allowing the experience to unfold without interference. It means staying present with the uncertainty instead of trying to replace it with answers. When you remain, the system no longer needs to defend itself. It can reorganize, release, and settle. Clarity does not emerge from control. Control belongs to the old pattern. The same pattern that relied on certainty, direction, and reassurance to feel safe. What follows the dark night requires something else entirely. Surrender. Not surrender is defeat, but surrender is trust in a process that operates beyond the mind's timetable. When resistance ends, the internal noise quiets, and in that quiet, clarity appears naturally, not as something you achieved, but as something that was waiting for you to stop interfering. When seen from a deeper perspective, the dark night of the soul is not a breakdown but a rite of passage. It marks the moment when the psyche moves from operating through conditioned responses to developing a more conscious relationship with reality. What feels like loss is actually the loosening of attachment. Attachment to identities, roles, emotional patterns, and narratives that once provided stability but no longer reflect who you are becoming. The system is not collapsing, it is shedding what it has outgrown. This phase often feels like a death because something real is ending. The identity that functioned in the world, that knew how to react, to belong, how to seek validation, is dissolving. But this death is not pathological. It is functional. It creates space for perception that is no longer driven by fear, expectation, or emotional reactivity. What emerges afterward is not a new mask, but a quieter form of presence. Through this process, the mind learns to see without immediately responding. Life is no longer filtered through urgency or the need to control outcomes. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of chasing, meaning you recognize what is already essential. This is why the dark night cannot be rushed or avoided. It is not punishment. It is maturation, the natural progression toward a deeper, more stable way of being in the world. The dark night of the soul did not arrive to confuse you or lead you astray. It came to remove everything that only looked like clarity. All the borrowed meanings, emotional shortcuts, and familiar certainties had to fade so something more honest, could take their place. What feels like emptiness is not absence, it is space. And space is where true understanding forms, quietly and without effort. When this night passes, clarity will not announce itself. You won't suddenly see more in a dramatic way. You will simply know there will be less in a debate, less urgency, less need to explain yourself or your path. The knowing will be calm, grounded, and unshakable because it won't depend on emotion or belief. It will rest in something deeper than thought. There is nothing you need to rush toward, nothing you need to fix. This process moves at its own pace, and forcing it only delays what is already unfolding. Let the silence complete its work. Let the night do what it came to do. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments if you are moving through this phase yourself. Sometimes, the most meaningful connection happens in shared silence.